Check, check. All right, I think we are now live and active. You can probably hear the fan going in the background, and that's because it loves doing all this stuff from one machine. But I don't know if anyone is out there yet, so I don't think I have to worry, just for the future streamers. So, welcome to the second session of P5Live Sessions. Basically just improvising with P5JS in P5Live, this environment here. A special plan for today is to mess sort of randomly, I'll make the code a bit bigger, to mess randomly with the references. To sort of, there's a built-in references in P5Live where it sort of shows you everything. It's importing the full references from P5JS's website, and it shows you which ones you've clicked on, so it's kind of nice just to use to go and learn from. And it's using like the visited CSS link, and so I don't know how long those are active for, but it will let you know where you've been, so you can keep track of it that way. And when I implemented and fixed up these references over the summer, I added a surprise function because you might look up the references based on a need, forgetting how something works and going and checking out what you can feed into an ellipse. But I thought it's also nice to surprise yourself, have a serendipitous moment. And I'm calling this P5Live Sessions accidentally educational, because I'm just planning on just messing around for an hour and coding for myself, but I'll try to explain stuff while I go that you could also learn from. But the point of this random reference is like I plan to just click on these, be confronted with some functions that hopefully I've never used before, have to quickly learn how they work, or learn how they work through just playing with them a whole lot. Because while teaching, it's just like a fact that if you want to learn how any of these things work, to get a good understanding of how ellipse or stroke cap or rect mode work, you have to play with it at least 5 times. The more the merrier, to have it sink in of what you can use it for later on improvising and just building off these little blocks. So I have a feeling I'm going to get a bunch that will show up that I won't want to play with. Like all the references are here, including all the audio, like the P5 sound. And at the moment, I don't plan on doing audio stuff in the stream. I think I'm going to be reacting to audio in future sessions and doing VJ style. But for now, I should probably make this surprise button ignore these, just because it would be hard to use those in this current setup. But let's see what we get. I'll write down a few of these and then see which ones we have to play with, and hope I don't have to fall back on any tricks or such that are fun to use. The whole point is to get out of comfort zone and learn something new. So, survey says, request pointer lock. It's a function, locks the pointer to its current position and makes it invisible. Use mouse XY to get the difference of the mouse moved over it. Interesting. So this is something to mess with in a 3D context. So I'm going to write these things down to make a note, because maybe I'll have to come back a few times. So this is 2011-11, and our words are request pointer lock as a function. So I'll put that there. And maybe it's cool just to check out quickly what it does. Let's replace the code here with it. Press escape to show your cursor. Ah, there it is. It's this little tiny sketch in the upper corner there. Let's fix that by pressing escape, like they said to do, and get the mouse back and say window width, window height. So this thing is full screen. And let's make the sphere much bigger. And if I run this, create camera, I wonder if this isn't quite ready for such a big canvas. Let's go back to 100, see why 100 worked. There, it works fine. Okay, so I know why, because it's using this like fraction of the mouse here. So let me bring back my code, bring it back, and maybe let's just take this fraction away, make it smaller. Maybe it should be ×1. Maybe I should have that totally off. All right, we're gonna have to come back and play with that one. But it's a really cool function that I've only used maybe once before in a different context, like a really interesting library for running around in like a maze. And basically it's letting my mouse disappear and endlessly control this thing. And when I press escape, I get my mouse back. Okay, so we're gonna have to play with that. So I write it down here and we'll figure out how to use that. Let's go grab another random surprise. Boop, 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 boop. Add column. This is for a table object. I'm gonna put it on the maybes because I don't plan on importing a whole table of data. I'm not quite ready for that, but we'll add it as a maybe. And I'm going to get rid of all the stuff that's in the sketch because it's actually ticking over my mouse every time I click. Add column. Okay, probably not going to use. I think I just have to be picky as these things come in. Directional light, that is probably nice because we'll be in a 3D environment. So directional light, that's also something I'm barely playing with because I'm usually really happy in a 3D environment just saying lights and seeing what that does. WebGL. Let's have a background and a sphere that's like 400 or 300. It's always fun just to type lights and then get some shading, no stroke, and you get this free shading. If I turn it off, it looks like so. But directional lights get fancy. They let you create a directional light with color and direction. You can have up to 5 of them in one place. Okay, maybe let's check one more just to add to our repertoire, but just with these two, I think there's a lot that we could play with. Let's see. 4 creates a for loop. Okay, I mean, this is something I know, play with a lot just to have a bunch of things on there. But of course, you can say our sketch has to use for, which means maybe we have to have the lights be in a for loop, up to 5 of them, and control it. And position sets the position for an element. This is like when you are playing with a slider or something, you can set the position of it. So you could move the canvas somewhere. Position, yeah, let's add it to the list because maybe it means we have to have like a GUI slider and position that to interact with stuff. So position. Okay. And then if it's fixed, relative, sticky, initial, inherit, where it goes on the screen. Cool. I think that's enough from our surprise references. Maybe we'll come back to it. But let's start playing with this. I think the request pointer lock will come a little bit in once we're ready to have it do something, like rotate this, maybe with a stroke. We might want to use the mouse to move this thing around. And if I played with something like orbit control, is really fun for clicking and moving things around. But of course you run out of your cursor hitting the wall. It's like I can't go any more to the right. I can't go any more to the left. And so of course this pointer lock, it like steals your mouse and then it can keep going infinitely to the right or to the left. Will be interesting to explore and get more experience with because, yeah, I've only used it once before within a library. All right, so let's play with directional lights. Let's start there. I'm going to open up the reference and go back to it, directional lights, and read about this thing. Maybe we first apply it to a sphere. So we get to give it an amount of red, green, blue, the position of the light, directional light. Okay, which is like a 250, 250, 250. I mean, it's always nice to just steal the example and see what happens. And they have a sphere without a stroke. Let's take that code and apply it and see what it does to our sphere. Interesting, not happy. Happy, not happy. I wonder if, is there something missing here? Because I don't have these guys, of course. It's using variables inside of here that were invented just before it. That's why it's good to copy the whole sketch. So that's pretty cool. You could do like eclipse style graphics by playing with where the mouse is. So they're setting the color. If we got rid of one of these, it should go into like that's red and green, making a yellow, just red, pink, back to white, blue. So first three values are the RGB to mess with. I'll go back to just normal full white shading, and then we get to play with the direction. And what are these other things? There is the position, and then there's even more things that could be applied, or the X, Y, Z direction. What happens if this becomes a 10? Okay, now it's like barely having an effect on it. When I go 1, it has a lot of effect. If I go 0.1, it has a ton of effect. Okay. Nice to be able to get that eclipse going there. And this, I'll go back to 1. And this thing is saying the mouse divided by the width, half of it, times 2. And I think that's a tricky way. Minus 0.5. What happens if I get rid of that? Or let's replace this and try just a different number. Let's say dirt x equals mouse x. What is it when it's just the mouse x? Okay, it means there's just like this little bit of value here, which means this thing must be something between maybe 1 and 0. If I say 0, I say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What does this thing go up to? Oops, 10. All right, if I go 20, okay, it's maybe continuing to spin around the back, maybe. Now it's just kind of more and more off to this side. And if I go minus, that's 0. Minus 10, 20, okay. Yeah, so I can send it in either direction with about a minus 10 to positive 10. So we could like make this thing go back and forth by saying sine frame count times 0.1 times 10. Oops, slow it down a bit. Make it a little faster. Sorry about that blaring fan. I think it's super happy that there's like OBS and YouTube and this sketch going, but maybe I can get the fan to go down a bit. So this thing is kind of moving back and forth. Let's do it to the Y as well. Oops, dir Y. Yeah, cool. So now it's a diagonal. Because they're the exact same numbers, like these sine waves are going in perfect parallel movement. So I'll make one half as fast. And then we end up getting kind of a Lisa-Jus pattern of this movement. Is interesting. It's like doing an infinity symbol at 90 degrees. Or I could go 5 and 2, and then that's like an infinity motion of the light. I don't think it makes a difference if there's no background. Nope, because it's like this solid sphere. What's it like if we're inside of it? That's always fun. Maybe I have to go a little more, times 2. Oh no, we probably are inside of it. Yep, we are inside of this thing. Okay. Let's just go, whoops, divided back to half. Third. So maybe it's interesting to have just 2 of these things going. I want to play again with what, I forget already what that does. Ah, that's about like how much effect it's moving on it. Okay, interesting, flash. And if I was to do 100, then it's just like barely offset from the center doing its thing. Okay, yeah, let's add a second light. Now it's extra bright, and let's play with some color mixing. So I'm gonna make first one yellow, second one blue, and they need to be kind of offset. So what happens if that's not negative? Then I think they're just kind of moving in opposite directions of each other. If I turn this one off, that's the blue path, that's the yellow path, and they're following the exact same values. So technically I could give this like a way faster value for going up and down. Interesting. What else do I need to know about this thing? I already lost it. Directional light. Okay, I can have up to 5 of them. Okay. Yeah, I think we have enough to play with. Yeah, so maybe it's interesting using a loop and building a few of these spheres and giving each one like a slightly different rotation on it, maybe like phases of the moon of these things sitting next to each other. So that was cool to test out, having 2 of them. Let me quickly save this and give it a name. Create a new folder, call it P5Live Sessions 201111. And let's give this sketch a name. We'll call it P5Live. And I'll call this sphere der light and put it inside of there. Be a little organized. And I'll clone it. So now I just cloned it, so it's an exact copy that I can start messing with. The only difference is it's got a little underscore, so I'm not overriding anything. And now I'm going to trash these duplicates. I think I'll get rid of the original one, which was interactive and nice. Nice example, but I like this kind of on an animated path. The orbit control still works. I can technically rotate this thing around and be kind of on the back side of it. It maybe helps to have a stroke to see what that means, that we're actually spinning around it. Yeah, so we'll see if we use that. For now, we don't really need it. And I'm going to use a for loop. So how does a for loop work? I say for as long as this stuff is true, do this stuff. And I'm going to start with actually I'm not going to do it yet. I know from the references that I can only use 5 of these directional lights, so I'll just make a loop count that's 5. I like to say LC for loop count. I is less than loop count, count by 1. So now 5 times this stuff is happening. And let's throw this thing in there. And now we have a super saturated light because it's 5 times over 5 spheres blasting the same area. And so I'm going to offset these things a bit. I'm going to say, I'm just going to map in my loop. I'll say like width times 0.1, width times 0.9 to spread this thing out. Push, pop, translate x0. So I'm putting these things apart, but I forgot. This needs to be, because it's WebGL, it's from minus half the width to positive half the width. So this is really minus width times 0.4, let's say, to positive width times 0.4, and these need to be way smaller now. Let's make them times 0.2, 0.1. All right. And let's go back to moon phases. And right now it's a whole bunch of the same directional light in the same spot. And maybe to get these to be different phases of light, I should use I in here somehow. So now just by doing that, they're all on like a slightly different phase. This one is maybe too much over the same spot. But technically we're getting, everyone is getting the light, so they're probably shining on each other's lights. That would be interesting. So let me actually get rid of this thing. So it's just plain, check out the lights, turn off the lights. And when this is outside of the loop, it freaks out. Because I'm using I, I'm outside the loop, so we're not allowed to use I. Okay, so that's what these 5 things are like doing their thing. Yeah, so it's a question if I should put these inside the loop or if it should stay outside of the thing. Let's see. Yeah, I'm going to, interesting, swish, swish. Yeah, that's with a single directional light. Outside, let's put the light back inside and see how to make each one of these things a bit more different. So I'll copy or cut, put it back. And just have to use I in here in some fancy way. So I'm gonna say like, let's do again this mapping of I. I comes in and I'm gonna say it needs to go from like minus 10 to 10. And let's just turn this off for a minute so it stops moving. And then this is like, that's 20, 30, 40. Wow, it starts to look quite real. It's just a vector thing, but maybe it's because it's multiple lights hitting multiple of these balls. Yep, I think we need to make this thing move. So what happens if I do like frame count modulo times 0.1, 01, 1. That's so-so. It'd be interesting if we could see the directional lights. It's hard to imagine where exactly they are. I don't know if this is really the position of it. What happens if I put an ellipse that's minus dir x, dir minus dir y, 50, and say fill to 55. I don't, oh, there it is. Maybe. Ah, weird. It's this little thingy right here. Okay. Yeah, because this is just a number going from minus 10 to 100. That's why this thing is just sitting here. And y is stuck at 0. So if I activate this thing again, then we should start seeing that little circle move around somewhere. There it is. Okay, so somehow that's what the light is doing. turn down the light so it's not so bright. Yeah, and actually there's no reason to only have 5 shapes. It's maybe just the light should only be 5 of these lights. Let's play again with other ways of messing with it. Dir x equals frame count times 0.1 times 100. I'm just overriding this value here. It's kind of fun. So maybe it's interesting to build a whole grid of these things and let the lights mess with them in different ways. And just for quickly testing, let's turn off the fill, no fill, and set the stroke to be white. I know the lighting doesn't have an effect on just a stroke. Interesting. Never mind. Back as you were. All right. So I think each of these need a different color, a different color, different speed happening in there. Got to bring I back. I times 0.1 plus, so that there's a slightly different phase in all of them. Ooh, cool. Let's mess with the Y in a similar way. I times 2 plus. And maybe these are just, maybe I do a couple rows of them. Let's do a loop within the loop, for loop. We're supposed to use for loops. Let's do a double loop and push these things even further down. So I'm gonna make a for, open it up, and say let j equal 0, j is less than, let's just make a grid 5 by 5. And put these things inside of there. Control T to clean it up. And now I need to mess with a Y. I'll just copy paste this thing and use it for Y. And map it to go from the top to the bottom. Height. Let's see when I go Y. Not what I wanted. Ah, because I'm mapping I, that's why J needs to get mapped. There we go. A whole bunch of eggs. Let's make these things a bit smaller. Orbit control is on, so I can spin around these things. Kind of fun, what's happening there with the lighting. Let's get some different color mixtures going in there. So I'm also going to play with first just some sine waves in there to make each one different. Or let's do a frame count modulo 255, like add and take away red, and to make them unique, I'll say I times 2 plus, so the I gets in there. And maybe 20, so it's like a lot of change. And then the red is being added at different amounts at different times, and I'm gonna copy paste this thing and tweak the numbers. Invert the number and make this a super tiny change for the amount of blue that gets added. So the blue is going to shift really slowly. Maybe it's nice to let this thing constantly just spin on its own. So we can constantly check what the lights are like. rather the Z. I just wanted this thing kind of spinning around, if I can articulate it right. Maybe this is why we need this lock pointer, so I can have better control over the thing. I should be playing with this other number out here, this -1. So maybe I make these variables so it's easier to see. Let R equal 0 for now. Let's deal this. Or no, just this. Just steal those numbers. This is B. And this was G. All right. And test what that number does again. If I make it 100. Interesting, they have a glowing from the bottom. It can be nice to put a sphere around everything. It's always fun to put yourself in an environment, so maybe we get to see what those lights are doing on the walls if I just put one giant sphere back here. Height times 2. Wow, trippy. And right now this sphere is super big, so we're seeing inside of it with no fill. If I set that sphere to be my mouse Y, then we can see what it's like. Like that's this little sphere. And as I get bigger, eventually I break through. And then I'm inside of this thing and getting interesting color palette. All those lights are landing on the walls. I'll go back to this being height. I could also go normal material and force it just to be this other shading technique. It then ignores the lights. Or I wonder what happens if by default, it has a fill that's 255. But if I say it's 100, I think that's affecting everything. So I'm going to tell all of these to have a fill of 255. Put it before that. So they all get 255 on these spheres. Better yet, let's do it just before we draw the sphere, so each one could be different. And down here, I think I could make this background kind of dim. Yeah, now it's like 5, 15, 20, 200, super bright. But nice, it can just be a bit of atmosphere back there behind these things. Pretty wild. Quickly change to a vox. Voxels. Maybe it's nice to really push the computer and make another for loop. We're doing like an X and a Y, and might as well do a Z and get some even more depth in there, whether it's spheres or boxes. Maybe boxes are easier for the computer to render, I'd like to think and hope. So we got our Y, let's do yet another loop. And call this one IJK. Uh-oh. I hope that didn't just freak out. I think we just hit a bug. K is less than K. Why didn't it like this K? Yep, interesting. Hopefully the stream didn't cut out. We're gonna quickly try and fix this. Localhost #bug. What that does, I sure hope the stream is still working. Let's see. Yeah, it's gonna have a slight delay. #bug when you're running P5Live, either in the browser or here locally, it forces a brand new sketch and shows you the sketch that you were working on. And that way you could fix something and then say save and go back and find it. So I have a feeling for some reason it tried to run this for loop, which it shouldn't have, and it just became an infinite loop. So I'm going to put all this stuff inside of there. I'm going to double check. I'm not using k somewhere else, and that's why it freaked out, but I don't think so. K is less than, j is less than, let k equal 0. K is less than LC. Yeah, this should be good. I will save. And then it tries to run it. Cool. And it's all good, so I can go full screen again. Okay. So we should be fine. And now we need to offset in a z-axis. And tell this thing, yeah, it could be pretty much the same and just translate now on z. But we're still using our old variable, so we've got to use k. There we go. Nice. And yeah, right now this is a grid of 5, so it could easily be just a grid of 3 things. They're really spread out. They're keeping their distance. Social distanced boxes. We could also make it 8 and make this thing really dense and make the fan kick on again. But let's go back to like 4. Yeah, in the comments, reminds me of Cyril, totally. In the about, at the very, very, very bottom, Cyril was a huge influence for P5Live. Because they made it so easy to make these kinds of grids. You could just say like, give me a whole bunch of loop of that and tell it the dimensions. It was basically just doing a big for loop for you. Here we have to do all this work ourselves and put these loops in. But it was always fun playing with these kinds of shapes in Cyril. So we still can in P5.js, that's fun. And let's see if the lights need to be moving a bit more. I think they're still quite similar over each other because everything is getting this lighting. So I'm curious in what way I need to move the lights. I think I still have a lot to learn about this directional light to get these things to be unique and different than each other. It could be about this just barely having these numbers be different. Maybe that's why they're all the same still. Let me put a 20 and a 10 or even 100. Give them a huge offset to each other. I should probably be feeding some other values in there and see what happens. What if I feed this a 10? Is it still happy? Another 10? Still happy. Another 10. It might just be ignoring these other things, but I think we could feed it more values, if I'm not mistaken. What happens if this is random 100? I don't think that's doing anything. We just kind of made the lights go away. Probably really frustrating if someone's watching this and knows exactly how directional lights work. Don't change that one. Don't change that one. Okay. If I go 0, 1. I don't think that's slowing it down at all. Point. Yeah, it's definitely doing something about the intensity of the light on it. What if I put mouse X, mouse Y there? That's always a nice thing to use just to see like when it changes those numbers, what ends up happening. So that's interesting. That's like the light is on the top of them or it's somewhere down below them. And with this one, so in this case, to keep the light on top of them, it's better to have a negative, like a 0 or negative number. Yeah, that's interesting too, having this like, they're 3D, but you can barely tell. So now I'm going into the negative direction and they're getting quite bright. All right, let's just make up a value. Let's make this thing sine frame count times 0.1 times 50. The light doesn't have a position, it's a direction. I think you're right. It probably is about, yeah, it might just be like where my camera is and then pointing in different directions. That would be interesting. If it's just kind of, you can steer the thing around. And this was playing a direction. Check out the references again for directional light. The direction of the light. Okay. Maybe this was actually playing with the z-axis somehow. Let's see spheres again, what those look like. Yeah, it would be nice to get the lighting a bit more different. Okay. Yeah, thanks for the tip in the chat of what you think, how you imagine the directional light working. So maybe, even though I can have a bunch of directions, they either need to be way different cast, just kind of pointing in a way different direction. They might be still far too similar. If I said 100 here, even 1,000. Bring it down to 10. If you're getting dizzy, I pause the rotation for a minute so we can just, yeah, maybe have a better idea of where these things are going. But the other thing that should probably be happening is this directional light is happening way up here in the eye. So technically, then maybe that's why it's also the same, because I'm affecting everything by only one of my loops. And if I put this thing, I know I can't put it down here because we have, we're only allowed to have 5 of these things. But I should set it in a spot where it's affected by all the other things. So I could just do like a, yeah, basically I wanted to affect all this stuff be based on those, or maybe it just needs its own loop altogether. Times 50 plus. Interesting. Ooh, that's kind of nice shading, but going way too fast. I just did a hard reset, and so it repositioned everything to be straight on with the camera, which is probably where the lights are sitting. Now everything is way slower moving. And maybe it's interesting letting these things do some movement, not be so fixed on their grid where they are. Like if they were, no, spheres are nice. I think they need to have some offset from their exact position. So I could say like let off x equal a sine frame count times, I should either use I or j, oops, times 0.01 times 100, and let's say j plus. And add that to one of these values so they can move around a bit. So now it's like giving them some sway left and right. But if I make that value different, then they're going to have like their own alignment. If I make it 10, yeah, they'll move at totally different speeds with each other. That's if I use I or J. If I use I, then we're getting that split moving on an x-axis. That's interesting. So it's either like the rows splitting or the column splitting, or if I use K, it's the depth moving. So like from near to far, they're shifting back and forth. If I give it a small value, then they're kind of going to be in line with each other. We'll be able to see the wave that they make. There we can see it. Front ones move and then the back ones go. Make it more dramatic. Maybe the size of these things should also change. It should be somehow based on how far back we're going. So maybe it's like K times 10, or the opposite, times 100. Whoa, those things are too big. K times 20, yeah. We want to maybe do the opposite. The back one should be the big ones. So maybe I say, I think I can just invert it. No, I can't. Oops. J. Yeah, it's quite interesting how their size can also be really changing dependent. You might get sick of sine waves in a little while, but they're super fun to play with just for giving animation to things. Too fast, slow it down. Oh, and this is not so happy, calculating all those numbers maybe. I plus. Now we're getting the walking through in a column direction, or if I go K. Interesting. If I turn off this other sphere in the background that's giving us atmosphere, I always have to see what stuff looks like without a background. All right, let's bring that back. The colors are still fairly dim, I think, because I, at one point, turned these things down. Yeah, maybe I try to get this pointer lock involved in here so that I can use it in an interesting way, where like right now I have to click and move, and it would be nice when I click that I'm inside of this space and can just spin around freely. So I'm going to tell these things they can't be quite so big, and I'll give them a smaller detail because they're probably using a lot of graphics card to render all those points. So now they're a little bit rougher. Could make them even rougher. Low poly spheres. Let's recenter ourselves. Maybe it's fun to have I times J times 0.1 to get some of these different values involved in when and why they get big and small. Nice to have that bigger number. to a box that would be just lines. It's also kind of interesting having a long rectangular shapes. Yeah, you can really create a lot of atmosphere with this directional light. It makes a huge difference, I think, having this sphere back there or not. You can make it more dramatic, just seeing those almost beams of light. That's the depth of these things. Maybe it is nice to have those as tall slabs that aren't that thick. You found out at the last PCD that you could now use opacity on these shapes. I'm sure the graphics card will super enjoy that. That we could see through these things and then they almost become maybe prism-like. But I have a feeling we're not getting that much effect that it's worth really seeing through them. Yeah, that makes a nice illusion there. Interesting. Now we could make a simulator for bubbles coming up in a beer or soda. Render that advertisement. Okay, let's go back to trying to play with the pointer lock and see if we can get that. I'm going to take away my opacity. So I just have these kind of hanging lights down there and try to incorporate this thing. Pointer lock, request pointer lock and exit pointer lock. Use moved X and Y to get the difference. The mouse was moved from the last call. Note there's not all browsers support it. Okay, but this one does. So you can do it on setup or I could do it on a key press. Cam, create cam. So they were tilting the cam, but I could also just set the rotation about it. That might be easier. And so the key is this request pointer lock. Let's add it as a key press. Void, not void function. And I'll say if I press the space bar, 32, and I think I will try to use that just to toggle on and off. And so I will make one global variable called let locked equals false and say if, I'll say locked equals not locked. If locked, request this thing. If we unlock, I guess we just press escape to do it. Actually, we don't even need any of this. I don't think I have to exit. I can just, yeah, maybe it is nice to exit it. Let's go back, and there was this exit, which I think just undoes it. It might be the same as pressing escape. Ah, they're also using a locked. Nice. Let's see if this works. So I will recompile, press space. Okay, I'm locked in, now I'm not locked. Awesome. Now I need to use moved X and Y. So I was using this thing, orbit control, which is great for manually clicking and twisting, but I'll disable it for now. And say rotate Y is radians of moved X. I will now, we should say if locked. I don't want it to fight me. If locked, do that thing. So it doesn't do anything. I press, and now it does something, but it's fighting. Interesting. Why doesn't it like this? Let's exit out of that. Maybe it needs to be, because it's just this tiny little number. It's like could use a custom texture on the boxes. Sure. How did you / multiple lines? Yep, I'll come back to, it's nice having some questions and ping pong while I do this. Real quick, this rotate's not working because if I print this point X, out moved X, it's just, I think, plus minus a couple numbers. Print this thing. It's just like in the corner, I can see it's like how much I moved in that direction. So I really need to make it a number that grows by this amount. So maybe I will let something called rot exist. Rot will be a create vector that's 0, 0, 0. This is just like storing x, y, z for me. And down here, I'll move this out of here and say you are always moving rot.x. And in here, I'll adjust it. I'll say rot.x equals plus equals. So it's a growing number. And then I can do the same with a y and say my moved y. And I could add that to an x rotation. All right, I think that should work. I'll refresh, press spacebar. Yeah, now I can like infinitely spin in one direction or go back or go up and down. So this is sweet that I'm not limited by the size of my window with this orbit control, which is super nice to have the precision of like moving and then stopping. Now I can press spacebar, move it a bit, move it a bit. Yeah, for how I turn multiple lines on and off in P5Live, it's using Ace Editor, which has Sublime key bindings. And so I can press Command / and turn a whole chunk on and off. On other keyboards, it can be really tricky. I know on German keyboards, it's like you have to press Shift 7. And that is why if I go to the settings, there are custom shortcuts. And I made a custom shortcut for, what is it called? Comment code. Because this is the default that's good, that's used for myself. Command / I forget, is it command / or, yeah, it's command /. But you could always change it by just clicking and typing a new one, or you click if you don't want to change it. So you could find a better key on a special keyboard. I'm going to save this thing or give it a new name. And this is now, I don't even know what to call this thing. This is like XYZ loop dir light pointer lock. Getting a little long. And a custom texture on a box. Of course, I have a feeling we lose the lighting, but let's find out. Let image function preload. Yeah, P5Live is doing smooth updates every time we change stuff in the draw. When things are just kind of tweaked here, then it's like you don't notice the change, or it's just smooth. If you do global stuff or add new functions, then it has to do a total refresh. So I'm going to say image is loading an image that is on my local version, data images / fish.png. And now the question is, can our boxes or spheres have an image plus lighting? I would hope so. I think so. Texture image. All right. And maybe I should go back to spheres. Oh, but this is not good for a sphere. I go back to box because the second and third value are the detail, which shouldn't go above 24, I think. Let's just make these be 50 by low poly spheres and bring back our sizing. And let it get way bigger because these are fishes. Press space and rotate around our colorful fishes, which are now too big. Yeah, interesting. So you can do all kinds of cool things having texture on these things. This is a fish is always nice. It can also be fun. I think in the last we're at an hour, but we'll go a little bit over. It's super fun to make a texture be graphic layer. So I'm going to invent something called layer. In my setup, I'm going to say layer equals create graphics and have this thing be like 200 by 200. And then I'm going to draw on the layer. So maybe what I do is I either draw on it or I just put random speckles on it. Maybe we use no, not a for loop. Let's just draw on the thing. Layer dot stroke will be 255. Layer dot line will be mouse X, mouse Y, P mouse X, P mouse Y, but it has to be like a fraction of that. So maybe I just create my graphics to be a quarter of the width, quarter of the height, and then I can always just take a fraction of that value. Should technically mean if I move my mouse up here, it's drawing on that thing. I'll say use the layer as our texture, and I need a way to clear the thing. So I'll say if key code equals 8, which is the delete, layer dot clear. Let's start over. I know it's because the mouse is centered in WebGL mode. I guess my whole drawing zone. I know it could just be about where it's wrapped around that thing. Maybe that's what this is. So I can delete. I can draw. Maybe we don't need so many of these things. Let's create just 2 of them, but way bigger. So we can see what this line is doing. Spin around, we can go inside of them and see that line. I think it is actually nice having a bunch of them, so I take it back, bring them back. Maybe it is nice to use a box again instead of a sphere when we have this drawing. Let's make them perfect cubes. Hit delete and start over. Rotate around and get another view on them. Delete. Yeah, or it can be nice. Maybe we'll finish with letting these things just randomly speckle themselves. So I'll say fill is 255. And let's actually say layer dot ellipse random layer dot width random layer dot height and random 10. I'll press delete once and now we get this yeah, it's like speckling the things, putting the speckle, and then every once in a while it should clear itself. Or so it doesn't get filled up all the way, we just say round random1 times 255 should give us sometimes a black dot, sometimes a white dot, and then they'll constantly add up and add texture. Otherwise we can always delete and start over. Oh yeah, they have a stroke still. I want to turn off the stroke. Layer dot stroke. No stroke. No stroke. I keep forgetting. I'm always used to clicking for orbit control, but now it's all about pressing space to move around and see some of these things. And with this, it might be nice to go back to a sphere and let it be a little more poly. Ooh, now it's like dinosaur eggs hanging out there. strange disco balls. Wild. We're going to turn off the sphere once and let them leave a trace to see what kind of patterns they create. Of course, I can interrupt it by moving the mouse and spinning this thing around. And now, of course, it would be fun to press Control-Shift-A to add the code for playing with audio, the snippet, and then tweaking the loop so that it could listen to my music and react and make little pulses. And maybe the amount of dots that are being added to each of these things is based on how loud the different frequencies are. Who knows? Yep, I hope you've enjoyed watching another P5Live session. We'll leave it at that. We'll be back next week, same time, Tuesdays, 9 p.m., and doing something totally different. Try and have each week kind of, there will be certain sessions, there will be this random references like we just played. I gotta, get out of the mouse control. Yeah, here we played with request pointer lock, directional light, for loop. I didn't play with position, but I don't know if we needed it. But I think other times I'll do some co-coding with people out there in the internet world. So if you're interested in doing a co-coding session, send me a PM or however you can on YouTube, or you find me on Instagram. And we could have a session doing some improvised co-coding. I'll also try and do sessions doing audio reactive visuals. So it could be nice to have a radio stream to someone out there making music or DJing, and we can do some live visuals and take advantage of the VJ aspect of P5Live. Yeah, so have fun playing with P5Live, and I will see you next week.